Hi, everyone. My name is Jim Alan Nurkan. I'm a principal consultant at Nurkan Consulting. I'm pleased, honored, and very excited to be part of World Congress 2020 for LAYER123. This presentation I'm about to start is an inspirational piece, high-level musings, if you will, on a fast-tracked 5G future and how we all can collaborate together. Hi, everyone. My name is Jim Alan Nurkan. 5G in a future happen. So let's get this started. Share content. From beginning. I'm gonna try and make this presentation in 20 minutes time, and afterwards there will be a Q&A session for us to discuss any questions you may have, thoughts, and get your ideas out there as well. But let's just give it a crack. I'll split this presentation up in 5 elements, or 5 sections: challenges, opportunity, elements, killer apps, and the future. This picture you see there is a picture of Fleet Street in Victorian times, London, St. Paul's Cathedral in the background. I'll get more into that afterwards, but it's clear that some of the challenges we have today have been along for a very long time. Maybe it's time for us to try and change that. Really, when I think about 5G future, I think about an ecosystem, and I've been working in carrier industry for nigh on 20 years, working with various carriers and global business cases. And I used to have a saying that, or maybe still have, that nobody has a string long enough. So if you want to have international connectivity across even a few countries or continents, you need several players involved. And that's perhaps not the same, but a similar analogy for 5G is that nobody has all the pieces of the puzzle. I think there's some clear advantages to be had by combining technologies, namely within transmission, transceiving, perhaps is a better term for it, sensors, content, of course, compute platform. But I'll get into that in more detail later in the presentation. The challenges, aside from the collaboration across business verticals, is that there are very few standards to define, with no standards to define the collaboration within such an ecosystem. We've had it, there are many standards within the IEEE organization and others for IT things. So so you can produce an item that will work. Classic computing, even networking, Ethernet standards and so on. So we have these standards, but very few for business collaboration. That's definitely a challenge that's stopping this ecosystem evolving. Another thing, and it's clear today that companies have competing agendas. But it's normal. You have your business, you focus on X or Y. You've told your shareholders, stakeholders, that this is what you want to do. You're aiming towards that target, and that target is very diverse. So what company A or company B does not have the same targets, and therefore it's difficult for them to align and find common step towards working together, which is really what I'm advocating for here. Never mind some of these players being in the same competitive space, vying for the same competitive monies. And what I'm trying to say with this presentation is that perhaps we could sidestep this, and there will be a large cake available for everyone. Everyone can have a slice. Last thing, and this is, mind you, very high level. I'm trying to get this done in 20 minutes. I can see I've spent more than 5 minutes already. Because of course there's a multitude of challenges. But the last thing I've tried to highlight here is lack of political verve. Now that may be a little bit unfair. I think maybe it's as with all or with a lot of fast-paced technology developments, it's very difficult for lawmakers to make sense of it. It's very difficult for lawmakers to create rules or guidance around it, and that's why I'm also talking about standards, because that would make it easier for lawmakers to align to and say, okay, yeah, this makes sense. This is a good idea. Let's try and enshrine this. I will get into this further at this point further on in the presentation as well. So next slide. The opportunity. As I've said a couple of times now already, I believe that we can all work together if collaboration is defined by a standard framework. That could be BSI-defined standards, DIN or ETSI, but even local municipalities or larger cities have already very clear ways of working together, whether that be controlling an autonomous rail network. We see it in flying air traffic control systems. Have very clear standards defined, and I'll get into why that's important later. The picture I've used here in the background is just to show that these challenges have been along for a long time, working together, all of us. Within telecommunications has been an ongoing thing for more than 150 years. This picture is of the first transatlantic telegraph cable that was laid in 1853. I couldn't believe it when I researched it. I thought it was would at least be 30 years later, 1853. So, and since then we've been trying to collaborate in the telco sector, and there's space for more of that. Another poignant and important part here in this slide is I've put governmental and municipal oversight and ownership of the framework. It's important to indemnify. Let me start a different way. I believe for a collaboration defined by a framework, it's crucial that framework has a majority owner. And in this case, a government or municipal entity could do that. And that would create benefits both for the collaboration, but also for the government or the municipal entity, and which I'll get into a bit further on here. Another more simpler take on this is simple cross-vertical collaboration. So let's just say, as an example, telco A works with enterprise B and content provider C to create a combined offering, utilizing their 5G network. And we're already seeing that with some zero rating on different platforms and apps. But it's very much old hat. Could be done on 3G, 4G. But yeah, so we're seeing that. But it could work, of course, in 5G as well. Now, what I believe is important to make a 5G network or 5G ecosystem work are these elements. You would have sensors, you would have transmission capability, you need to have a compute platform, and you need to have content. Very briefly, if you imagine an automated automotive application. In this framework, if you imagine that the municipal owner has the framework in place and is managing the system, then the municipality would have access to all the sensors, both placed in those vehicles. So, excuse me. In this case, I've used cameras, auditory sensors, but there are more gyroscopes, of course, speed sensors, and so on. And all that data could be fed in together with the already city management systems, CCTV cameras, and so on, to create a pervasive reality that those vehicles can function in. That would also rely in automotive applications on edge computing. For many of these applications and killer apps I'm getting into later on, specific edge computing is perhaps not a requirement. Edge computing still is a bit loosely defined, but I say edge computing is a platform that has less than 2 milliseconds latency between sender and compute platform. For automotive, that's important. Perhaps for gaming or retail, it's not so important. And that could be up to 5 milliseconds. Content is also super important. This is where the killer app resides. But the killer app cannot work without having a pervasive ecosystem that can work. Killer apps. Now I'm getting into the meat of it all. Because if you have, let's just imagine you have a framework defined, you have a compute platform available, you have your transmission capability, and you have all those sensors in the city that you require. And for this scope, I'm thinking major cities is the area to roll out. Perhaps not so much countryside in this presentation. There are other. I know there's a lot of focus on farming and such with regards to 5G application, which is completely relevant and AI in that respect. But for this, I've chosen the city as environment because you can have a high density of sensors that would make a pervasive experience for everybody using it. Now, let me just go through these points that could, these killer apps that could exist if you have a network, an ecosystem that looks like that. You could make AR fashion. What I mean by that is not just going into a store and all the, a clothing store and all the sizes that are available that you would use being highlighted, plus cool retail experiences in an AR capacity within a store. I'm also talking about once you wear said garment, there could be identifiers on the garment that then when you walk on the street, other people viewing the AR reality would see those features. So you could have a color changing sweater. You could have a dress that always flowing in the wind. Who knows? There's a lot of opportunity here. So more or less, as an avatar would clothe themselves, you could be able to do this in real life with AR capability. AR retail, I think there's been a lot of use cases. There's been a lot of thought around this area and people creating cool presentations. I imagine a future with this network where you can walk down the street, you can see, if you look at a building, you can see what's going on in that building, what offers is in play now in an AR capacity. When you go in, you can have more interactive AR going on. Really, only the imagination puts limits to that. So I touched briefly on automotive automation, meaning self-driving vehicles. As a whole, it's probably easier way to say that. But imagine again in a city where what I'm trying to do here is what it's saying. Today's majority of research within self-driving vehicles has been that the vehicle itself takes all the decision. So the compute power resides within the vehicle. and it's utilizing the limited sensor capability that's within that sole vehicle, perhaps with a little bit of input from outside, but majority within the vehicle. What I'm saying now is that imagine a reality where the decisions of that vehicle, how to get through traffic, is done by an outside source. So it's done by the compute platform. The compute platform has access to all the sensors of all the vehicles that sign up for it, plus all the sensors within the city, creating really a view ahead of what's going on. And since the compute platform also knows all the agendas of said individual vehicles, it can really navigate the city much faster. And that then brings me into these pictures that I put up. That picture you see in the middle here is of London Bridge, also in the 1880s, 1890s, late 1880s actually. Traffic is horrendous. It's as much as then as it is now. I live in London. I live in Whitechapel in London. And if I today were to take a Hackney cab, black cab, from my address to, let's say, Oxford Street, it would take me the same amount of time to get from Whitechapel to Oxford Street as it would in 1880. Journey times have not been reduced. Now, what London did was to create the tube network to try and alleviate that, and perhaps now I'm talking overground travel. Overground travel would take the same time approximately as it would back then, and that's due to simple traffic rules. But we could cut 30, 40, perhaps even 50% off this journey time if we utilized a compute platform, a traffic control system for the city for automated vehicles. And I think that's a great selling point for municipal governments. Who doesn't want to give their citizens more time? Now, the same for public transport. You could have completely automated buses, overground transport, completely automated taxis, automated street maintenance. Now, this is being done sort of in many cities. I know in Helsinki, for instance, they utilize the city's sensors, cameras, and so on to identify. And many cities does that in the Nordic regions to identify if there's snow and where there's particular snowfall in an area, and can send out snow sweepers to a specific area that's then tracked with GPS. With this system, you could do it completely automated. So that's food for thought. Another thing that I think an AI-enabled city would really would be amazing in an AI-enabled city is AI storytelling. Again, using Whitechapel as an example, going out in the city, and today you can do Jack the Ripper tours. You know, a historian or a guide takes you through the various areas where all this gruesomeness happened. But in this way, if you imagine you have an AR story unfolding, so you're out there, you're seeing what's going on, almost like a film, but you're in the environment. And I think that complete immersion within the city is amazing. Also for historic pieces, you know, see how the city looked at a certain era, see how the city has developed, and so on. AR gaming, I think, is almost a no-brainer. We saw the huge Pokemon Go phenomenon still going, but imagine that on a much, much larger scale, what you could do in the city, or anywhere really where you have an AR-enabled area. Live action role playing. If you're a geek like me, you know, I used to play Dungeons and Dragons, and I can just imagine running around as my own avatar, you know, slaying dragons and ogres in a city environment. Amazing. Anyway, so this is 20 minutes now. I knew this time would fly by very, very fast. Just let me spend a couple of minutes talking about the future. You know, who knows? I think vertical collaboration within a defined framework is the way to go. if we want to fast track what we can do with existing technologies today. There are, I'm sure these things that I mentioned will happen decades down the line if we don't do that, where one consolidated vendor can do everything. But that's, I think that's a different talk and has different connotations altogether. One thing I haven't mentioned, because I want to leave it as a given, I believe all this data that's going to flow in the network has to be anonymized, simply for people's peace of mind and security. There are anonymizing networks out there like Tim Berners-Lee's Solid initiative, and others are also developing. I think that's super important to have as a part of this. So, for instance, in an AR fashion scenario, you don't link the sweater bought with the person, and the system only sees a sweater, let's say, and doesn't see the person. And there's much to be said for that. Another thing to touch on the strange times that we are in right now is how should all this information be displayed? Are you going to carry your phone around in front of your face all the time and looking at all this? No. And I think what we see now, certainly in the younger generation, is due to COVID, a lot of people are starting to wear visors, or face shields, if you will. And on them, you can project a lot of information. So you have your own personal HUD, heads-up display. And I think this, not only would it keep you safe, but give you a source of information that you can enable in an AR reality. So that's one more slide. I think that's coming to the end of it. Thank you. This is a nice picture of, by the way, the rugby pictures from Flash Gordon. I love Flash Gordon and as a kid, and I still love it now. And this is telegraph poles being set up through the American desert. And again, with an enabling technology, the track right next to it. So the railroads and telegraph have been following each other ever since one was developed, more or less. The other have followed. And this is what I'm advocating for in this case. So let me just go back out of this, back to my meeting. Hi, everybody. Now I will stop the recording, and there will be a Q&A session after this. Thanks for facilitating, Milad. I'm not sure if there are any questions from any audience. If not, I will end the session and say thank you everyone for watching.